The royal banquet hall was louder than usual that night. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead, casting fractured light across marble floors and gilded walls. Nobles gathered in clusters, their laughter sharp and practiced, their gloved hands lifting wine glasses in gestures that meant nothing at all. Servants moved silently between them, invisible by design, trained to exist without truly being present. Every eye shifted toward the grand entrance as the vampire king stepped inside. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver-gray hair swept back from a face that revealed nothing. His dark eyes swept across the hall in a single measured glance, and conversations faltered, then resumed in hushed tones. He was powerful, unreadable, feared. Centuries of rule had carved his presence into something that commanded without words. But tonight, he was not alone. Beside him walked a woman of elegant bearing, her silver gown flowing softly with each careful step. Her features held the same quiet dignity as her son's, though her eyes carried something gentler, watchfulness without coldness, patience worn smooth by time. She moved with the grace of someone who had learned long ago to observe the world rather than speak to it. The vampire king's mother was deaf. Very few people in the kingdom knew. Fewer still dared to acknowledge it. In royal gatherings, servants were instructed to speak only to the king, to communicate through aids, to avoid what the palace stewards delicately called the awkwardness. It was easier, they said, for everyone involved. Easier to pretend the Queen Mother existed only as an ornament beside her son, a figure to be admired from a distance rather than truly engaged. She had endured this arrangement for decades. And she had never complained. When they were seated in a private section of the hall, separated from the crowd by velvet ropes and the invisible weight of hierarchy, the staff hesitated. The head steward motioned to the servants lined against the wall, his expression tight with practiced anxiety. His eyes swept over them one by one, searching for someone capable enough to approach the royal table without causing incident. His gaze landed on a young woman near the end of the row. Ilara. She was ordinary by every measure the palace used to judge worth. Simple uniform, pressed but not new. Dark hair pulled back in a plain ribbon. Nervous hands clasped at her waist. Eyes lowered in respect, not confidence. She had worked in the palace for only 3 months, assigned to banquet service because her references had been impeccable and her manner was quiet enough not to draw attention. The head steward gestured sharply. Ilara stepped forward, her heart beating against her ribs like a caged bird. As she approached the royal table, the steward caught her arm and leaned close. "Speak only to His Majesty," he whispered. "The Queen Mother has attendance for any needs. Do not address her directly. Do you understand?" Ilara nodded, though something in her chest tightened at the instruction. She approached the table with measured steps, her gaze fixed on the embroidered edge of the tablecloth. The vampire king sat with his hands resting on the arms of his chair, his expression remote. Beside him, his mother looked out at the glittering hall with eyes that seemed to search for something she had long since stopped expecting to find. Ilara opened her mouth to speak the standard greeting. But then she saw it. The Queen Mother's hands rested on the table, fingers slightly curved, thumbs tucked in a way that Alara recognized instantly. It was a resting position, comfortable and unconscious, that she had seen 1,000 times before. In her brother's hands. The words she had rehearsed dissolved on her tongue. Something deeper took their place, something that had lived inside her since childhood, as natural as breathing. Alara turned gently toward the Queen Mother and smiled. Then she lifted her hands. Fluent, confident, beautiful sign language flowed from her fingers, each movement shaped with care and warmth. Good evening, Your Majesty. It is an honor to serve you. If you need anything, I will be here. Silence fell over the table. The Queen Mother froze. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, her composure cracked into something raw and startled. Her lips parted slightly, not in speech but in the sharp intake of breath that comes from being surprised by kindness. No royal servant had ever addressed her directly before. Not like this. Not in her language. Across the hall, whispers started, rippling outward like stones dropped in still water. Nobles leaned toward each other, fans raised, voices speculating. The head steward's face went pale. The vampire king slowly turned his head toward the waitress. His expression was impossible to read. His dark eyes studied her with the same measured intensity he used when assessing threats to his kingdom, strategies in council, betrayals from trusted allies. Alara felt the weight of his gaze and braced herself, certain she had overstepped, certain she would be dismissed, perhaps worse. Then his mother touched his arm. Her hands moved quickly, signing with emotion that trembled at the edges of her gestures. She was asking him a question. Who is she? Where did she learn? Her fingers shaped the words with the urgency of someone who had waited a very long time to speak. The king turned back to Alara. You understand sign language. It was not a question. Alara bowed her head. Yes, Your Majesty. My younger brother was deaf from birth. We spoke this way always. It was the language of our home. Was? Alara's hands stilled at her sides. He passed 4 years ago, Your Majesty. A fever that came through our village. The Queen Mother's expression softened. She signed again, this time directly to Alara. I'm sorry for your loss. What was his name? Alara looked up, meeting the older woman's eyes. It was a breach of protocol, perhaps, but the question deserved a true answer. Tomas, Your Majesty. His name was Tomas. The Queen Mother nodded slowly, then signed with deliberate care. Thank you for speaking to me tonight. It has been a long time. Alara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back and responded with hands that shook only slightly. It is my honor, Your Majesty. Truly. They continued like that for several minutes, signing back and forth in a conversation that needed no voice. The Queen Mother asked about her life, her village, her work at the palace. Alara answered honestly, her initial nervousness melting into something warmer. At one point, the older woman made a dry observation about the pretentiousness of palace cuisine, and Alara laughed before she could stop herself. The sound surprised them both. But the Queen Mother was smiling now, actually smiling, with a lightness that seemed to erase years from her face. The Vampire King watched in silence. When Alara finished taking their order and stepped back, bowing politely, the hall remained quiet. Nobles stared openly. The head steward looked like he might faint. Even the servants along the wall had stopped pretending not to watch. The king rose from his chair. Every noble stiffened. Conversations died. The crystalline clink of glasses ceased. All attention fixed on the tall figure who moved with deliberate calm toward the trembling waitress. Alara braced herself. She thought of her brother, of the way he used to sign a brave by pressing his fist to his heart. She had never felt very brave. But she did not regret what she had done. The Vampire King stopped before her. "What is your name?" he asked. "Alara, your Majesty." He regarded her for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice carrying across the silent hall. "From this night forward, you will serve at the royal court. Not as a banquet waitress, but as a companion to my mother. You will attend her at all official functions. You will be given quarters in the inner palace. And you will be treated with the same respect afforded to any member of the royal household." Gasps echoed across the banquet hall. The head steward swayed on his feet. Nobles exchanged shocked glances, their whispers rising again like wind through autumn leaves. Alara stared at the king, unable to find words in any language. "Your Majesty, I don't know what to say." "You honored the one person in this room whom no one else has ever had the courage to truly see," he said quietly. "That requires no words. Only acceptance." From the table, the Queen Mother signed something to her son. He inclined his head in acknowledgement, and for just a moment, the hard lines of his face seemed to ease. Alara bowed deeply, her heart too full to speak. The weeks that followed changed everything. Alara moved into a small but comfortable room in the inner palace, with a window overlooking the gardens and a fireplace that crackled warmly against the mountain chill. She was given new clothing appropriate to her station, though she remained uncomfortable in the finer fabrics and often longed for her simple servant's dress. Her duties were unlike anything she had known before. She accompanied the Queen Mother to council observations, garden walks, afternoon teas with visiting dignitaries. She translated conversations, explained cultural references, and ensured that the older woman was always included rather than merely present. For the first time in decades, the Queen Mother participated in life at court rather than observing it from behind glass. They developed a friendship that surprised them both. The Queen Mother, whose name was Iselder, possessed a sharp wit that had been buried under years of isolation. She told Alara stories of the kingdom's ancient history, shared memories of her late husband, and confided the small frustrations of watching a world that rarely bothered to speak to her directly. Alara, in turn, spoke of her village, her brother, the life she had left behind. She described the way Tomas had loved the forest, how he would sign the names of birds for hours, how his death had left a silence in her heart that she had never quite filled. "You carry him with you," Iselder signed one afternoon, as they sat in the sun-warmed alcove of the library. "In your hands. In your language. That is not silence, Alara. That is continuation." Alara had to look away, blinking against the sudden brightness of the light. But not everyone at court was pleased with the changes. Lord Cassius was a vampire noble of considerable influence and even greater pride. He had long served on the king's council, and he considered himself an authority on proper protocol. The elevation of a common servant to a position of intimacy with the royal household offended his sense of order. He began with whispers. Careful observations dropped into conversations like poison into wine. He questioned Alara's background, implied that her motives were suspect, suggested that she was manipulating an elderly woman's loneliness for personal gain. The whispers spread. Servants who had once smiled at Alara now avoided her eyes. Minor nobles who had accepted her presence began to turn away when she approached. One evening, Lord Cassius approached the Queen Mother directly during a court gathering. He bowed with exaggerated politeness and spoke slowly, loudly, as if addressing a child. "Your Majesty, I trust your new companion is serving you well." Such a rapid elevation must be so confusing for someone of her background. Iselder could not hear his words, but she could read the contempt in his posture, the performance in his bow. She turned to Alara, who stood frozen beside her, and signed quickly, "Oh, what did he say?" Alara hesitated, then translated honestly. Iselder's expression did not change, but something in her eyes grew very cold. She signed her response, and Alara, with only a moment's hesitation, spoke it aloud for the gathered nobles to hear. "Her Majesty thanks Lord Cassius for his concern. She wishes him to know that in 300 years of court life, she has learned to recognize genuine kindness from performance. She hopes Lord Cassius might someday learn the same." Lord Cassius' face flushed crimson. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, a shadow fell across the conversation. The vampire king had appeared behind him. "Lord Cassius," the king said, his voice soft but unmistakably cold, "I believe you have other duties to attend to this evening." The noble bowed stiffly and retreated. That night, a formal announcement was distributed to every member of court. It established the position of royal interpreter as an official station within the household, with protections equal to any titled advisor. Any disrespect toward the holder of this position would be treated as disrespect toward the crown itself. The whispers did not stop entirely, but they grew quieter. And those who had turned away from Alara began, slowly, to turn back. Months passed. Seasons turned. The kingdom continued its ancient rhythms, and Alara found a place within them that felt, increasingly, like home. She learned the corridors of the palace, the hidden gardens where a Selder liked to walk, the quiet study where the king occasionally invited them for private dinners. She watched the relationship between mother and son deepen in ways she suspected had not been possible before. They signed to each other now, sometimes for hours, sharing thoughts that had been locked away for too long. One evening, Alara found Iselda alone in the garden, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "Your Majesty?" Ilara signed. "Is something troubling you?" Iselda smiled, but there was something wistful in it. "I was thinking of all the years I spent watching through windows. Hearing nothing, speaking to no one, existing at the edge of everything. I thought that was what my life would be until the end." She turned to face Alara fully. "And then a shy young woman with nervous hands walked up to my table and spoke to me as if I were a person. Not a problem. Not an embarrassment. A person." Ilara felt her throat tighten. "I only did what felt right." "Yes," Iselda signed. "And that is exactly why it mattered. Kindness is not remarkable because it is difficult. It is remarkable because so few people choose it when it would be easier to look away." She reached out and took Alara's hands in her own. "You gave me back my voice, child. Not by speaking for me, but by making space for me to speak. That is a gift I can never fully repay. But I hope you know that you have a home here now. Always." Alara could not sign with her hands held, so she simply squeezed Iselda's fingers and let the tears fall freely. From the shadow of the doorway, the vampire king watched in silence. His expression remained unreadable, but something in his bearing had softened, the rigid posture of a ruler easing into something more human. He had spent centuries protecting his kingdom through strength and strategy, through cold decisions and calculated sacrifices. But watching his mother laugh, watching her speak, watching her live in ways he had feared were lost forever, he understood that the most profound protection was often the quietest. Not a sword raised in battle. A hand raised in kindness. Years later, when Alara had grown into a woman of quiet confidence, when her position at court was respected rather than questioned, visitors would sometimes ask about her story. How had a simple waitress risen so far? The answer was always the same, told not by Alara herself but by those who had witnessed that first evening in the banquet hall. She had not sought power. She had not demanded recognition. She had simply looked at a woman whom everyone else had learned to overlook, and she had chosen to see her. That was all. That was everything. And in the vampire kingdom, where strength was measured in centuries and empires, they learned to tell a different kind of story, one where the greatest power was not in ruling over others, but in making room for them to be truly known. The shy waitress with nervous hands had changed her fate that night. But she had changed the kingdom's fate too. One small act of seeing. One quiet revolution of kindness. And a legacy that would be signed, hand to hand, for generations to come.